Shine bright up all night. We're never slowing down.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm pretty excited to show you this today, mainly because we got new ways to build certain weapons now. While it's situational, it's always a breath of fresh air when an alternative build setup actually results in a usable weapon. Today's standouts is the Kompressa. There are a few other weapons and setups I'll be showing you today, but the highlight is definitely this weapon, since normally it only exists as a primer tool. It's an 8 DPS sucks, but maybe we can do something about that. Some of the stuff we use today comes from the new Angels of Zariman update, so consider doing the new content if you haven't yet. You can also trade for basically all the new gear, however, they are still somewhat pricey. The Kompressa. In the past, this radial damage stat wouldn't show up, which made the weapon look quite horrid. 8 base damage, but the radial actually has 168. This is enough for it to be functional on star charts, but it comes with a plethora of other issues, especially because gun CO doesn't work on AoE, so we can't make the most out of the damage being heavily weighted towards it. This weapon has subpar crit multiplier and a new core tier crit chance, so none of the ons are critting, and also hits like a wet noodle when it does. A raw damage build in 2022 with a 30% base status weapon is a bit iffy. Especially because it doesn't have the base damage of a shotgun. Even though it has a multi-shot of 4, it still isn't that high. But it has an 8 viral, making it one of the very few weapons in the game that can build corrosive and viral. This cemented its place as a very effective primer, and found use in level cap runs as a demoless primer. Especially in setups where your DPS weapon cannot benefit from gun CO or condition overload itself, the rapid status application on a corrosive heat viral build minimizes armor and maxes your damage instantly for your actual DPS tool. Or if there are shields in the way and you aren't using toxin DPS, you can go magnetic heat viral, where magnetic will boost damage for your DPS tool against shields, viral will boost it against the armored health, and heat will crowd control trash mobs. Examples include Korum's unique attack, which doesn't benefit from CO and occupies your melee slot, meaning you can't bring Vastalok to strip armor. But today, we're building the Kompressa as a DPS weapon. Standalone, it will not replace the meta, and is nowhere near as good as the AoE meta. But for a generic DPS weapon, it's pretty good. Better than your conventional single target min-max builds. And when you bring it into loadout synergy, it's actually very scary and stronger than almost everything except the absolute strongest and obvious choices. But why the Kompressa instead of other weapons? Because Kompressa stands the most to gain from being a dedicated primer and unusable DPS tool to an absolute monster of a weapon. But yes, we will look at some other options today too. The most important factor in today's video is the new Cascadia empowered arcane. It drops from Angels and Thrax units, and the fastest way to farm this is spamming Void Cascade because every Exilizer has a new Thrax unit, and they spawn about every 30 to 35 seconds on top of the natural Thrax spawns the missions have. Anyways, the arcane deals 750 damage, matching the element of a status proc you inflict. So if you deal a heat proc, it does 750 heat damage. If you deal 2 heat procs, it deals 1500 heat damage. If you deal 1 heat and 1 corrosive proc, it will deal 750 heat and 750 corrosive damage. However, the damage this arcane inflicts is reduced by armor, so if you scale them to higher levels, the arcane damage is significantly lower. The arcane damage is also affected by health and armor modifiers though, meaning heat damage from this weapon is boosted against cloned flesh, corrosive damage from this arcane benefits against ferrite armor, etc. The arcane damage is also completely unaffected by damage falloff though, so the small AoV of Kompressa will not cause the arcane to do less than 750 raw damage at the edge. Interestingly, Toxin Lash's Force Toxin procs will trigger this arcane too for an extra hit, however Toxin Lash is so strong that this is mostly irrelevant. It also does not scale with elemental mod damage, base damage, or IPS mods, crits, or conditional mods that directly add any kind of damage to the weapon. So what does affect the damage of this arcane? Faction damage mods and external bonuses, but excluding Eclipse or Gruda's passive. So stuff like Laetum's 20 times extra damage from Devouring Attrition will buff this 750 to 15,750. However, Laetum's damage is so strong it really doesn't matter. Actually, let's take a quick aside to address Laetum again. One interesting thing about Laetum is you can build it for 100% crit with Avenger and slap on Cascadia Empowered. The white numbers the Arcane produces will still be able to trigger Overwhelming Attrition, the 400 times 3 perk tree on Evolution 5. which makes it massively stronger, over twice as strong as even the best Devouring Attrition builds. Combining Galvanized Crosshairs with Avengers leads to the strongest standalone Laetum setup that doesn't rely on abilities or frames and has well over 100% crit. Using Zata though completely breaks both Evolution 5 perks on Laetum and results in some of the highest damage in the game. Zata double dips Devouring's 20 times damage multiplier for 400 times damage on the white number hit. Zata also can trigger Overwhelming's 400 times 3 stack mechanic with its white numbers, meaning you don't need to slot Cascadia Empowered on a 100% crit Laetum build anymore and can use normal weapon arcanes. Anyways, back to Cascadia and Kompressa. This is the build I'm using for it. Based on what we discussed earlier, damage, elementals, and crits don't directly affect the amount of damage the arcane does. Therefore, I have no 90% elementals or primed variants, nor do I have any base damage on this build. It's just full status, multi-shot, fire rate, and the appropriate elements chosen for their status effects. We have Viral, Corrosive, and Heats. Kompressa procs status so fast that the elemental weighting on this build isn't that important, especially because most of the damage is from the arcane and not the amount of elemental damage modded. This build reaches 138 status chance with Embedded Catalyzer active, a mod that boosts status chance by 90% when aiming after you cast an ability in the last 9 seconds. It has no cooldown, so you're free to recast as often as you want. At full galvanized stacks, this weapon has 290% multi-shot, which is equivalent to shooting out 15.6 pellets per trigger pull, and this is a full auto weapon. At 138% status with both a direct hit and a AoE component that can separately proc status. This means every trigger pull will produce 43 separate status effects. 43 status procs means 750 times 43 damage before accounting for armor and health modifiers, or 32,250 raw damage from the arcane. And remember, this is a single shot on full auto, with 5.33 fire rate, which can be boosted with Arcane Velocity that procs off crits to grant 120% more fire rate to pistols. While Kompressa only has 6% crit chance, with 15.6 pellets and such high fire rate, it will still be easy to proc. Having Arcane Velocity active boosts Kompressa's fire rate to 9.32 trigger pulls per second. So 32,250 raw damage times 9.32 per second, or 300,570. And then it will also be multiplied by the Bane for a further 1.55 times total damage, or 465,884 raw damage per second. All because of Cascadia Empowered. And that armor? Well, this amount of status procs, you bet we will cap out the 80% corrosive armor strip instantly with 10 stacks. And Heat will also reduce a further multiplicative 50%, meaning 90% temporary armor removal so long as you keep shooting. Then we have the Viral that will instantly max at 10 stacks as well for 4.25 times more damage. So that 465,884 raw arcane damage per second, it only has to deal with 10% of the enemy's armor, and will be boosted by 4.25 times because of Viral, and the corrosive damage will even ignore some of that remaining 10% armor as well. Proof is in practice, and you can easily see how it absolutely destroys these enemies with ease. The best part about Cascadia Empowered though is how it is always active. You do not need to build stacks on the weapon arcane like Merciless, Deadhead, or Dexterity. For a toy weapon like this that is normally just a primer, getting on-demand damage instantly helps it immensely to be viable. Finally, if you're going to use a bullet hose AoE pistol like this at DPS, you will need to bring a pistol ammo mutation to maintain the ammo economy. For alternative mods instead of Embedded Catalyzer, you can consider Prime Fulmination for a bit better AoE, Prime Slit Magazine, or Primed Quick Draw for better DPS uptime. Now that we know how Cascadia Empowered works, it seems like anything that spits out a lot of status shreds with it. That's true, but the thing is, you are giving up a base damage weapon arcane slot for it and crit scaling, so this only works on weapons that have inferior base damage, or cannot scale properly with Guncio and also produce a ton of status. And because armor is a problem, they also need to either have innate Viral or corrosive so that we can run corrosive and Viral together. Otherwise, the build will be at best equal or worse than a traditional crit hybrid build. There are very few weapons in the game that have base, viral, or corrosive damage, and even fewer ones that underperform and would benefit from Cascadia Empowered. There are a few others that won't show here, but primary weapons, we got Comrex, Phage, and Hema. Phage is the highest DPS weapon in the game alongside Convectrix for single target. Cormrex also has ridiculous insane damage. Kima is the only one here that is truly lacking in damage. It isn't a bad weapon, but is somewhat underwhelming outside of specific setups and has innate viral, but it lacks the AoE of Kompressa and has lower status, and is burst fire. Also has no innate multi-shot. Lethal Torrent also doesn't exist for rifles, meaning you get less multi-shot or fire rate since you cannot combine them together into one slot. This makes it slightly worse than Kompressa. If I look up Corrosive, we get Scourge, which is actually a strong weapon itself, and Synapse, which is an extremely strong weapon. Neither of them will benefit from Cascadia Empowered because of this. For pistols, we only got Kompressa for viral. For Corrosive, we got Catabolyst, Stug, and Kuva Seer. Stug doesn't work because its status is way too low, 0% on the shot and 10% on the AoE, and the bullet drop is annoying to deal with. There are many ways to make Stug work, but this isn't one of them. Kuva Seer is a slower firing semi-auto pistol that is actually hybrid viable, so it can actually work as a DPS weapon, unlike Kompressa, and has eclipse scaling for gun CO. I actually covered how strong this weapon can be in my Spearex and Kuva Seer 2.0 video that I would strongly recommend checking out at the top right. So while the Kuva Seer appears to be an actually good competitor to the Kompressa, because it even has a 2-hit mechanic with direct hit and AoE for separate status effects, you lose out on a lot by building it for Cascadia Empowered, because you lose the crits on a good hybrid weapon and also the gun CO having busted scaling on the main shot. The only actual alternative I have in my inventory to Kompressa is the Catabolyst. This is a base corrosive beam with awkward crit stats but amazing status. Being a beam already makes it amazing at triggering Cascadia Empowered with its base fire rate of 12. Beams tick twice per ammo, so this 12 fire rate actually only uses 6 ammo per second. Let's look at the build I'm using on it. Wow, it's basically identical to the Kompressa build. Well, that's not surprising though, since we're building for Cascadia Empowered, not Catabolyst. We just needed a weapon that has good enough status and procs it quickly. This build results in 19.2 fire rate and a final 3.9 multi-shot. With Arcane Velocity, the fire rate shoots up to 33.6, or burning 16.8 ammo per second. This will take 2 seconds to dump the entire magazine and makes a very bursty beam build. Having Embedded Catalyzer active pushes status at 197.8. This build should produce 259 status procs per second, or about 478 status procs per magazine. A lot of these procs will be capped stacks because Corrosive and Viral cannot go above 10, but they will still count as procs and contribute to the damage setting of Cascadia Empowered. 259 procs per second means 194,250 damage from Cascadia Empowered, which is multiplied by the Prime Bane by 1.55 times to 301,088 raw damage, which admittedly is less than Kompressa. Kompressa won because of its innate 4 base multi-shot making up for it not being a beam weapon, but even this is no laughing matter. Look at how it just shreds these corrupted heavy gunners, and because the damage comes from the arcane, headshots don't matter. You can just shoot at the body. In fact, for best KPS, I would recommend dropping Embedded Catalyzer for Seeker since this is a beam, so you can punch through the whole crowd with this weapon and status proc everything to death with arcane damage. You could alternatively also consider dropping Lethal Torrent for Prime Quick Draw or Prime Slip Magazine for more quality of life at the expense of some damage. You might be wondering why I chose to only show against armored enemies. It's because for Corpus or unarmored enemies, it's much more effective to just build a normal raw damage build and it will kill them easily that way. I tried a Cascadia Empowered Nucor set up against Corpus, but it was actually worse than just building a generic magnetic progenitor of viral heat Nucor. But this isn't the end. We can take the Catabolyst and Kompressa even further. There's a reason you saw Zephyr at the start. Zephyr turns single target and small AoE weapons into big AoE Brahmas. I'm sure you've seen how Zephyr works many times already, but this really takes the icing on the cake for Kompressa and Catabolyst. For some reason, Funnel Clouds was actually worse than Cascadia Empowered on single target weapons or small AoE like Kompressa. I'm not exactly sure why, but it just was. Anyways, shooting Kompressa into the tornadoes will massively multiply its damage by 4, since each tornado will get hit and regurgitated out while also applying it as a blanket AoE with 0 falloff. So you get the damage of a direct hit, but on everything. 4 times damage in AoE. It kills these corrupted heavy gunners in 2 to 3 shots, a Kompressa, and we have no buffs. If I ran Roar, which works like a faction Bane, it would actually apply to Cascadia Empowered since Banes work on it. Honestly, it's completely unnecessary because all it does is turn a 2 to 3 shot build to a consistent 2-shot kill build. I was unable to bring strength high enough to make the build 1-shot, but that's honestly vanity. I would instead recommend running some quality of life on Zephyr, like Breach Surge for blind since it has more range than Air Burst, while also boosting damage, or seeking Shuriken to strip Acolytes if you aren't bringing Vastalok. Essentially, you can build your Zephyr however you want. She has so much utility to survive with her jet stream and whatever you put on her one. This empty slot is meant to be perhaps sure-footed, but you really don't need this much strength and can easily trade it for more range instead, especially if you aren't using Roar. As the two standouts for Cascadia Empowered, I was genuinely impressed how well it worked on Kompressa and Catabolyst. Two very distinct builds, but at the same time it's a shame how niche the Arcane was and how it only really shines on select weapons like this. Hopefully we gain more interesting tools like this in the future, but with much more widespread viable application as an alternative build setup. What did you think? If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like, or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always, as soon as possible, like I've done with covering the Angels of Zariman update. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.